Somewhere right now, someone is being punished without a single hand being laid on them. No prison, no trial, just silence. A group chat gone quiet, a table where no one saves them a seat, a name that stops getting mentioned. We call it being canceled, being ghosted, being frozen out. It feels like a distinctly modern cruelty. It isn't. It's one of the oldest weapons our species ever built, and for most of human history, it was the only one we needed. For roughly 95% of the time our species has existed, there were no police, no courts, no jails, no written laws. Groups of 30, maybe 50 people, entirely dependent on each other to survive the next season. And within those groups, there were still liars, still cheats, still people who took more than their share, or turned violent, or refused to pull their weight. So what happened to them? The problem with being social: living in a group has always been a trade. You get protection, shared food, more eyes watching for danger, but you also get exposed to freeloaders, to bullies, to people who quietly take more than they give. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, our closest living window into how ancestors likely lived, have found something strange. These groups are almost obsessively egalitarian, not from generosity, because the group actively, sometimes brutally, prevents anyone from rising too far above the rest. The moment somebody starts hoarding food or acting like they're better than the rest, the group responds, not with a formal ruling, with something quieter and in some ways more devastating, a system with escalating stages. Weapon 1, ridicule. The first line of defense wasn't violence, it was mockery, a joke at someone's expense told in front of the whole camp, a nickname that stuck because it was humiliating. Researchers studying groups like the Juhoansi in southern Africa have documented this directly. A hunter who brags too much about a big kill isn't praised, he's mocked by the very people eating his meat. The message, "Don't get too big for this group," it sounds petty, it isn't. Ridicule costs nothing, draws no blood, and works almost every time because humans would rather do almost anything than be laughed at by people they depend on. Weapon 2, silence. When mockery didn't work, the group escalated. They stopped talking to the person. No eye contact, no conversation, no inclusion in the hunt, the meal, the fire. In a group of 30 who are your entire world, silence isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a countdown. This is essentially the silent treatment, except in the ancestral environment it wasn't a relationship tactic. It was a survival mechanism deployed by an entire community, and the person receiving it knew exactly what it meant. Change your behavior, or you will not survive out here alone. Weapon 3, banishment. If ridicule and silence failed, the next step was exile. Physical removal from the fire, the food, the protection of numbers. To modern ears, this sounds mild compared to prison. It was almost the opposite. A lone human cut off from group knowledge, group hunting, group defense was in serious danger within days. Exile was closer to a death sentence with extra steps. Weapon 4, the last resort. And then there's the punishment nobody likes to talk about. Sometimes when someone was violent enough, repeatedly enough, the group killed them. Not in rage, in agreement. Anthropologists have documented cases where a member who committed repeated, serious violence was executed by collective decision, sometimes carried out by a close relative, precisely because that made clear this wasn't personal revenge. It was the community protecting itself, using its most extreme option, only after everything else had failed. One case, up close. Among small-scale societies studied by anthropologists, there's a recurring sequence that shows up again and again, almost like a script the group already knows by heart. It starts small. A hunter begins taking more than his share of meat, quietly. Nobody says anything directly. Instead, the jokes start. Someone imitates the way he walks. The camp laughs. He laughs too, a little too loudly because laughing along is the only way to pretend it doesn't sting. The jokes get sharper, conversations go quiet when he sits down. Eyes slide past him. He's not being attacked, he's being watched, and he knows it. If he corrects course here, shares properly, stops pushing his weight around, the whole thing evaporates. He's let back in with no formal apology required, because none was ever formally demanded. But in the documented cases where the behavior didn't stop, the group stops including him in planning. He learns about a hunt after it's already happened. Functionally, he's already been exiled, he just hasn't physically left yet. The final step is almost a formality. He leaves, or he's told to, and by then it barely needs to be said out loud. What's striking isn't the cruelty of it, it's the efficiency. No courtroom, no written record. No single person forced to be the villain. The punishment was distributed across dozens of small, deniable actions so that no one person ever had to own the decision. When the land stopped moving, the punishments got harder. For hundreds of thousands of years, punishment stayed social because the group had no other tools, and because exile actually worked. A person cut off from a mobile band lost access to water sources, hunting grounds, seasonal migrations. Walking away meant walking into near certain death. Then, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, humans began doing something unprecedented, staying in one place, farming, storing grain. And the instant humans started accumulating property, the old tools started to fail. Exile stopped being an automatic death sentence. A banished person could walk to the next village and start over. Silence lost some of its bite when a person no longer depended on this exact group for every meal. And there was now something new to fight over: property. Theft became a bigger threat than freeloading. The old social tools weren't strong enough to contain it anymore. This is very likely where formal punishment was born. Where gossip and dirty looks could no longer settle the score, societies began writing rules down, appointing enforcers, and attaching physical consequences to violations. The earliest law codes we've ever found read less like moral philosophy and more like a settled society's answer to a very old problem: what do you do when shame alone stops being enough? Why this matters now. Here's the part that should make you slightly uncomfortable. None of these tools disappeared. We just moved them online and gave them different names. The mockery is the meme, the pile-on, the comment section calling someone out. The silence is the group chat that goes quiet the moment someone crosses a line, the follows that quietly disappear. The banishment is the block button, the community that decides you're no longer welcome. We like to think of these behaviors as something new, a byproduct of social media, but the mechanism is ancient. It was built over hundreds of thousands of years to solve one specific problem. How do you keep a small, cooperative group functioning when there's no police force, no judge, no jail cell, only each other? Psychologists have a name for the pain this causes. Social exclusion activates some of the same brain regions involved in physical pain. Your nervous system doesn't fully distinguish between a broken bone and being frozen out of the group chat. For most of human history, being cut off from the group really was a physical threat. The body never got the memo that the stakes changed. That's also why these tools keep getting reinvented instead of discarded. A manager who can't fire someone finds other employees quietly excluding them from meetings. A community that lacks formal moderation falls back on public shaming because it still works exactly as well as it did 50,000 years ago. The tools our ancestors built didn't vanish when we built courts and prisons. They just went underground, waiting for a moment when formal justice feels too slow, too distant. And in those moments, we reach for the same instincts a hunter-gatherer would have reached for: ridicule first, then silence, then removal, and only in the rarest cases, something final. The next time you watch someone get frozen out of a group, mocked in a comment section, or quietly erased from a community, you're not watching something new. You're watching one of the oldest systems our species ever built, still running exactly as designed, on hardware that hasn't changed in 50,000 years.